Okay, so we are looking at chapter 1 today, which is the sound of the shell. And the first question we're looking at is, why is that phrase the appropriate title for the chapter, the sound of the shell? Why is that a good choice of title for it? Yes?
The main premise was about the conch and how they used it to call the other kids who crashed.
So the shell, which who found?
Ralph.
Ralph and Piggy. They pulled it out of the lagoon, and this is what really starts the whole story, right? Because the sound of the shell is what brings all of the boys together. So, interesting, Ralph spots the shell, pulls it out, but actually it's Piggy's idea to blow into the shell to make the sound. What does that tell us about him as a character, since he was able to offer that suggestion? What might you say? Connor, go ahead. Yeah, he's smart, because Ralph didn't even know that that was a possibility. So Piggy shares that bit of information, and that shows that he's sort of an intelligent character, right? So it was his suggestion to do that. That brings all of the boys together, and the story begins, okay? So, all right, so the story begins with two boys in the jungle, right? And we learn a little bit about how they arrived there. So question 2 for me, but it was 1 for you, is how do the boys end up on this island? So what do we know for sure about how they arrived?
Well, we know that the plane crashed and they landed on the island. I don't know like what happened, but he said he saw a fire on one of the wings.
Perfect. So on page 8 is where she's pulling her information. So we know things like they were in a plane, okay? And I explained to you yesterday the premise behind this is that we are in the early 1940s, World War II is going on, the boys are from England, and we have this idea that possibly England was under some sort of a nuclear attack, and they wanted to try to round up women and children and fly them to safety, evacuate them out of the country. And so for some reason, all of these boys from varying boarding schools got rounded up on this plane together, and in a very unintelligent move, the only adult on the plane was a pilot, and we seem to assume that he has perished in the crash. So we have no adults, only boys, and these boys are sort of meeting each other for the first time, with the exception of the one group. There's that one group that arrives, and those boys seem like they know each other, right?
They're part of the choir.
They're part of the choir. So they must come from the same school, and they have a little leader, we meet him, and so on, okay? So what we know for certain comes from Piggy, and we're going to highlight what he says. So here's the answer. If you have anything you need to add to your own answers, feel free. And then we're going to highlight on page 8. So page 8, we're going to be at the bottom of the page. I'm going to have you count up lines, okay? So I would like you to count up with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, around 12 lines up from the bottom, you should see a little paragraph that starts with, when we was coming down. Do you see that? That's Piggy talking, right? So we're going to highlight, ready, highlight. When we was coming down, I looked through one of them windows. I saw the other part of the plane. There were flames coming out of it. He looked up and down the scar, and this is what the cabin done. Stop there. It says, the fair boy reached out and touched the jagged end of a trunk, and for a moment he looked interested. What happened to it? He asked. Where's it got to? So this is Ralph asking, well, where's the plane? Like, where's the rest of it? If it crashed here, shouldn't there be stuff, like remnants of the plane? And at the very bottom of page 8, we're going to take Piggy's reply. So highlight, the storm dragged it out to sea. If it wasn't half dangerous with all them tree trunks falling, there must have been some kids still in it. So, and there. So Piggy is the one who gives us the extra information. He claims, we was attacked, right? And then he also says that it was something about the storm. So we know that they were flying in weather that was dangerous. The plane could have been struck by lightning, and possibly another plane may have mistaken them as military or dangerous in some way and shot at them. So that's what we know, okay? So Ralph and Piggy are the first two boys to meet each other. They find the shell, right? They blow into the shell. They start calling other people out of the jungle, okay? And we're going to jump around a little bit. Let's see, I think I want to skip these for right now. So what's number 4 for you guys?
What was the
Number
scar?
4 is the scar.
What is the scar? Oh, I have what object is found on the beach. Let's see, we did that one, right? We'll take care of that one. So the shell, got the shell. Piggy was the one who decided to use it to call the others. Okay, so then it must be, you guys for number 4 must be my number 5. Are you okay with this one? Shell, we're good with that one? Okay. So for me, number 5 is the scars. Okay, so what do you guys have for that one? Yeah, go ahead.
Scar is the path that the cabin of the plane was going to be on.
Yeah, so this plane that's on fire comes at a high rate of speed, it lands on the beach and skids its way into the beginning of the jungle and comes to a rest. For some reason, there's no remnants of this plane, and the excuse that we talked about that Piggy gives is that possibly high tide came in and washed it away. So if there were any bodies in there, any kids that were trapped and still alive and maybe couldn't get out, all of that is gone. All we have in chapter 1 are the boys that come out of the jungle and across the beach and meet together on what we call the platform. So that's what we're seeing in chapter 1. So the scar is literally a blemish on the island. This uninhabited, beautiful tropical paradise has this burnt landing mark now across it where these boys have dropped in. Okay? So let's see, on page 16, let's go to 16, where they find the shell before they find survivors. There's a description of the shell that we want you to take, okay? Because it's important to know how the shell starts out, because it's going to change over time. So on page 16, we're looking at about the 4th indent down. So if you count down little indents, you should see a paragraph that starts with, Ralph took the shell from Piggy. Do you see that? Take the whole paragraph. So Ralph took the shell from Piggy and a little water ran down his arm. In color, the shell was deep cream, touched here and there with fading pink. Between the point worn away into a little hole and the pink lips of the mouth lay 18 inches of shell with a slight spiral twist covered with a delicate embossed pattern. Ralph shook sand out of the deep tube. So the shell is colorful, it's vibrant, it's yellow and pink, and it's got this cool twist and these delicate patterns on the outside. And so, when they find this, it's like this really beautiful thing. And it's also useful. They're able to use it for something. So, Piggy shows him what to do. And then on page 18 and 19, we have signs of life. Boys are coming from all over the place. And there is one group in particular that sort of changes the tone when they arrive. And this is that group of choir boys. So let's look at page 19. They are wearing very strange clothing. Now, the boys themselves are wearing school uniforms because they all come from these boarding schools. Did we talk about the strictness? Did we talk about that? Boarding schools, do you know what that means? You live there. You go to school, you live there, your parents pay for you to be there 365 days a year unless you come home on vacation. And it's very structured. People tell you, when to go to sleep, when to eat, when to study, what to wear, and there's a lot of rules that you need to follow. So the fact that these boys are all alone on this island is a big deal, right? Do you remember what was Ralph's reaction when he realized no grown-ups? What did he do?
Basically was jumping for joy, basically freaking out.
He stood on his head. He was doing handstands. He was so excited. He's like, no grown-ups. This is the first time that he has no one telling him what to do. He's excited. Piggy, on the other hand, when he realizes that there were no grown-ups, it says in the text, he was startled. He was, if you're startled, you're a little bit, shocked or worried, or he's not happy with the fact that there's no grown-ups. So, 2 different reactions from those kids, okay? So, we have on page 19 a really great description of this group, and we're going to take this. So I want you to look at the large paragraph at the bottom of the page, so page 19, you see this huge paragraph, And the paragraph starts with, within the diamond haze. Do you see where I am? Okay, just read and I'll tell you when to start highlighting. It says, within the diamond haze of the beach, something dark was fumbling along. Ralph saw it first and watched till the intentness of his gaze drew all eyes that way. Then the creature stepped from mirage onto clear sand, and they saw that the darkness was not all shadow, but mostly clothing. And we're going to start right here. Ready? Highlight. The creature was a party of boys marching approximately in step in two parallel lines and dressed in strangely eccentric clothing. Shorts, shirts, and different garments they carried in their hands, but each boy wore a square black cap with a silver badge on it. Their bodies from throat to ankle were hidden by black cloaks, which bore a long silver cross on the left breast, and each neck was finished off with a ham bone frill. When you get to frill, pause. Okay? And it says, the heat of the tropics, the descent, the search for food, and now this sweaty march along the blazing beach had given them the complexions of newly washed plums. And we're going to take the last line of the page, highlight. The boy who controlled them was dressed in the same way, though his cap badge was golden. Okay? So how does this group arrive? Why do they draw attention to themselves? Yeah.
They were like wearing like just clothes, walking.
Are they like just casually walking down the beach?
Walking
Look at the text.
Walking like two lines, like straight.
Do you remember when you were in elementary school and you had to walk in lines everywhere, single file, and you couldn't step out of line, you had to be quiet, right, and all that? So it says two parallel lines marching in step, and there was a boy in front of them leading the way. So they were marching across that sweltering hot sand in the blazing sun. And they're not wearing shorts and shirts like the other boys. They're wearing these wool cloaks, like capes from throat to ankle, covering their entire body. And they have little berets on with silver badges, and they're marching across in the heat. By the time they get to the platform, they're all ready to just fall over because they're so hot. And in fact, what happens? When they finally reach the platform, somebody faints, right? One of the boys falls right over and face in the sand. He's exhausted. Okay, so the boy that's different is Jack, right? They describe him as wearing a golden badge on his cap. And so he is the leader of this choir. These boys that arrived together probably all came from the same school. They know each other. These other boys that are all sort of coming out of the jungle are probably from varying schools and are just meeting each other for the first time. So some know each other, some are strangers. Okay, so they arrive, and on page 20, okay, I want to look at Jack, or his first interaction with the group. He leaps up onto the platform and he says, "Where's the man with the trumpet?" He assumes that there's going to be an adult calling them, okay? And so this is on page 20. It's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down, okay? So count down from the top. You should see where's the man with the trumpet, okay? Don't highlight yet. Ralph, sensing his sun blindness, answered him, and Ralph says to Jack, there's no man with a trumpet, it's only me. And this is Jack's first look at Ralph. And you're gonna highlight, the boy came close and peered down at Ralph, screwing up his face as he did so. What he saw of the fair-haired boy with the creamy shell on his knees did not seem to satisfy him. So pause there. So Jack takes a good hard look at Ralph, and he's not satisfied. And he turns his back on him, okay? So now, underneath that, we have another small paragraph that's going to describe what Jack looks like. So let's highlight this. And it's going to start with inside the floating cloak. Take the whole paragraph. Inside the floating cloak, he was tall, thin, and bony, and his hair was red beneath his black cap. His face was crumpled and freckled and ugly without silliness. Out of this face stared two light blue eyes, frustrated now, or turning, or ready to turn to anger. Stop there. So he's a redhead. He's got blue eyes, freckles. The text calls him ugly.
these are all things that could go in your answer to number 2 that we
Yes.
skipped over before? Or
Yeah.
did Jack allow?
Yeah, so if we go back to number
Go
2,
back, we could add those descriptions.
yeah, number 2, for Jack, we know he's a leader, he's thin, he's tall, he's got red hair, he's the leader of the choir, okay, and he seems a little bossy, right? A little bit bossy. All right. So Ralph says to him on page 20 that we're having a meeting and you should join in, right? And he asks, Jack asks, are there any grown-ups here? And Ralph says no. And Jack says, well then we'll have to look after ourselves then, okay? So on page 21, we see the kids sort of talking and getting names, and something happens on page 21 that Piggy did not want to happen. You remember what happens when he,
Yeah.
okay, so when he tells Ralph his name, he says it hushed, right? And then right, please don't tell the others, right? And then on page 21, what is this little conversation here that occurs between Jack and Ralph and Piggy? Go ahead.
Ralph tells all the others what her Piggy's nickname.
Yeah,
Correct.
so, yeah, he says, Jack says something like, kids' names. Why should I be Jack? I'm Mary Do. Like, he wants to be called by his last name. The other kids, you guys are children. I want to be called Mary Do. And Ralph's like, okay, you know. And so it says, Ralph turned to him quickly. This was the voice of one who knew his own mind. Then, went on Piggy, that boy, I forget. You're talking too much, said Jack Merridew. Shut up, fatty. Laughter arose. He's not fatty, cried Ralph. His real name's Piggy. And then all of the boys start laughing immediately. So I want to take the reaction of the group and the reaction of Piggy to this ridicule. So if you go down to the bottom of page 21, do you see the second to last paragraph that starts with a storm of laughter? Do you see that? Let's highlight that paragraph. A storm of laughter arose, and even the tiniest child joined in. And for the moment, the boys were a closed circuit of sympathy with Piggy outside. He went very pink, bowed his head, and cleaned his glasses again. So one of your questions is about why is Piggy an outcast, right? And we'll get there. But this gives you something to work with. His name makes him an outcast. Everybody's laughing at him, and the text literally says he's on the outside, looking in. Okay, so the boys immediately start ridiculing him, and he's sort of the kid that everybody picks on. Okay, so there are a couple of older boys besides Ralph. Ralph is the oldest, he's about 12. Then there's Jack. They mention in the book a boy named Maurice, he's the next oldest. Roger, a quiet boy. Simon was the one when they were standing in line. Do you remember what? He fainted. He was the one that fell on his face. He fainted, so he's one of the older boys as well. So we have a pocket of older boys, but we have a really large group of younger kids, like 6, 7, like kindergartners, first graders, so they're young, okay? So on page 22, we get leadership, okay? So on page 22, let's highlight. So start at the top, drop down about 6 or 7 lines, and do you see where it says Jack spoke? Okay, so we're going to highlight this two little lines. Jack spoke. We've got to decide about being rescued. So just those 2 lines. Okay, so somebody brings up priorities. We gotta get rescued. Okay, all the boys start talking. Ralph says, shut up. It seems to me we ought to have a chief to decide things. And all the boys are like, yeah, a chief. And Jack, in a very, bold move, tries to declare himself chief, right? So let's highlight that. Right here he says, I ought to be chief, said Jack with simple arrogance, because I'm chapter chorister and head boy, and I can sing C sharp. What does that have to do with survival? How is singing C sharp going to help them survive?
I don't know.
I don't think those are the credentials for leadership on the island.
charge.
Yes. And I can sing C sharp. Okay. So, all the kids are like, ooh, yeah. And then he's like, well then, he's going to just take over control. And the quiet boy, Roger, says, I think we should vote. And now everybody's minds are changed. Yes, let's vote, let's vote, let's vote. And what happens on page 23 when they take this vote? What happens? What happens, Blake? Go ahead.
Ralph wins.
He does, but who does vote for Jack? Because he's very fair. Ralph says, okay, hands up for Jack, right? And who?
Choir.
The whole choir. Obediently, right? He counts, he goes, okay, who wants me? And everybody's hand goes up. Right? And then they all applaud. Okay, so let's highlight, we're gonna highlight that scene. Top of page 23, ready? Starting right at the top of page 23, we're gonna take a huge chunk. So I'm gonna say highlight here, and I'm gonna go down like pretty far. So start right here, highlight. All right, who wants Jack for chief? With dreary obedience, the choir raised their hands. Who wants me? Every hand outside the choir except Piggy's was raised immediately. Then Piggy too raised his hand grudgingly into the air. Ralph counted. I'm chief then. The circle of boys broke into applause, and even the choir applauded, and the freckles on Jack's face disappeared under a blush of mortification. He started up, then changed his mind and sat down again while the air rang. Ralph looked at him, eager to offer something. Pause there for a moment. Why didn't Piggy want to vote for Ralph at first? Because it says that every hand went up and Piggy was just, why? Clark, why?
Because he revealed his name.
He told everybody his name, right? So he's like mad, but then even he was like, because he doesn't want Jack to be chief. So I'm gonna vote for Ralph, even though I'm mad at him. Because he told everybody my name. Okay, so then he counts, he's like, okay, I'm chief, and it says that Jack was mortified, and his face went red. What does that word mean? Mortified. If you're feeling mortified, what are you feeling? Dylan?
He said, enraged, angry.
Sort of. Mortification is on a different part of that spectrum.
Very embarrassed.
Yeah, it's like humiliated. So his face went red because he was angry. He was humiliated, but he probably was also feeling angry that he got outvoted. Okay, good. So Ralph reads this and immediately wants to make this situation better. And this is number 7. So what intelligent decision does Ralph make that, yes, he's chief, but he's including Jack because he realizes that Jack is upset. So what is the next thing where we left off? What's the next thing that happens, Angelo?
Ralph gives the choir to Jack.
Right? And he says, well, what do you want them to be? And what does Jack decide on? Hunters. Yeah, he's like, we're gonna be hunters. Okay, so the choir belongs to you, of course, is what he says. Like, I'm not gonna step on your toes. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
I'm not gonna step on your toes. That's your group. So he's definitely not gonna take control, okay, of the choir. All right. So I think we're good on page 23 with quotes. Okay, so then in his first act as chief, Ralph decides they have to do what? What are they going to do? This is one of your questions. What are they going to do? Go ahead. Why? Perfect. So they're going to trek across the island, try to get to a high point, to be able to look all around and make sure that they are really alone, right? Because if they see smoke, if they see boats, if they happen to see other people, they may get rescued. But if they climb to the highest point and they see nothing, then they know that they're really going to be all by themselves and they have to figure out a way to get rescued, okay? So who does he take with him? That was one of your questions. Who does he decide to take? Go ahead, John.
Ralph took Jack and Simon.
Yes, okay. So here are the answers for 8 and 9, okay? So as far as 8 goes, there are lots of reasons why Piggy is the outcast. We talked about a couple already, but if you were looking for other things, he's overweight, he wears glasses, he has asthma, okay? He talks a little funny, he talks a lot, he doesn't seem to know when to be quiet, right? And he's got this name that really marks him out as a target. Piggy. I don't know. You would think if he was smart, he would just say, you know, I'm so-and-so and not, you know, hey, this is what they called me, and by the way, I don't want to be called this. So maybe he's just not thinking.
Yeah, he's
Okay?
somewhat intelligent, but not very intelligent.
Okay. All right. So, all right, so our last highlight was 23. Okay, so let's go to 24 real quick. Okay, top of page 24, he says, I'm gonna go, Jack, and he looks around the boys, he says, Simon, okay? And then on page 24, what did you learn that Jack has that none of the other boys has? Yeah. A knife. So he pulls this big knife out before they go on this expedition, and he slams it into a tree trunk to show everybody that he has it. So I don't know why he has it, how he has it, but he's the only one that has a weapon. Okay? So on page 25, Piggy lets Ralph know that he's hurt, like that he you told them when I told you not to. And Ralph's not really too sympathetic about it. He really just says, better Piggy than Fatty, and leaves. So he doesn't really apologize or anything. So the three boys leave, and they do end up going and climbing the mountain. And what do they discover? What were they able to find out when they climbed the mountain? I want new hands, Chico. When they climbed the mountain, what do they discover? Okay, and do they see any other signs of life? No, so they know they're totally alone. So they realize we're by ourselves. Okay, so on page 29, at the top, we are going to highlight a big paragraph that describes what the island looks like. Now, the little card we gave you with the picture is basically generated from this description as well as other descriptions throughout the book. This is the best we can get of what it looks like. So let's highlight, starting at the top of 29, this belongs to us. That's Ralph talking. And then we're going to highlight this whole paragraph. It was roughly boat-shaped, humped near the end humped near this end, with behind them the jumbled descent to the shore. On the other side, rocks, cliffs, treetops, and a steep slope. Forward there, the length of the boat, a tamer descent, tree-clad, with hints of pink. And then the jungly flat of the island, dense green, but drawn at the end to a pink tail. There, where the island petered out in the water, was another island, a rock almost detached, standing like a fort, facing them across the green, with one bold pink bastion. So if you look at the very tail end of the picture, you'll see that there's a little detached part jutting out into the water that looks like a bunch of rocks, and that's what they're describing in that last part. So the island is basically a lot of jungle, a mountain, a lot of beach, and then there's this sort of rocky part towards the end, okay? So while they're on their little expedition, they discover they're totally alone, they have some fun rolling some rocks, being boys, doing those kinds of things. And then they're walking back to tell the others what they have discovered. And on page 31, we have a little bit of an encounter, right? So what does he find? Because it's not just that, Dylan. It's a piglet. So that means it's a baby. It's a baby. And it says it was caught in a curtain of creepers. What are creepers? Is your best guess? What do you think? Yeah, these vines. So its legs are tangled, okay? So it says on 31, read with me, they were in the beginnings of the thick forest, plonking with weary feet on a track when they heard the noises, squeakings, and the hard strike of hoofs on a path. As they pushed forward, the squeaking increased until it became a frenzy. They found a piglet caught in a curtain of creepers, throwing itself into elastic traces and all the badness of extreme terror. Its voice was thin, needle-sharp, and insistent. And we're going to start highlighting right here. So it starts with the three boys rushed forward. Is everybody with me? The three boys, it's about 10 lines down from the top of page 31. The three boys rushed forward, and Jack drew his knife again with a flourish. Okay, so he's like this. Keep highlighting. He raised his arm in the air. There came a pause, a hiatus. The pig continued to scream and the creepers to jerk, and the blade continued to flash at the end of a bony arm. The pause was only long enough for them to understand what an enormity the downward stroke would be. Pause there. Then the piglet tore loose from the creepers and scurried into the undergrowth. They were left looking at each other in the place of terror. Highlight. Jack's face was white under the freckles. He noticed that he still held the knife aloft and brought his arm down, replacing the blade in the sheath. Pause there. Then they all three laughed ashamedly and began to climb back to the track. So now Jack is embarrassed that he couldn't bring himself to do that. And we know because look at what he does and what he says. They're walking and he says, I was just choosing a place. I was just waiting for the right time to stab him. Like he's like trying to make it like, you know, he was waiting for the perfect moment when actually he wasn't. Why couldn't he do this? Why couldn't he bring his arm down and stab the piglet? Why?
Sensitive in what way?
Perhaps. What does the text tell us? What does the text tell us? Colin? It doesn't say he's weak. Mason?
He said that it basically said that it wasn't after him, like it was enormous.
It would be a huge thing to do, Anna.
Sensitive with blood.
He doesn't like blood. And it says right here, Ralph says, you should stick a pig. They always talk about sticking a pig. And I'm going to highlight what Jack says. He says, you cut a pig's throat to let the blood out, said Jack. Otherwise, you can't eat the meat. You see where I am? And then highlight, why didn't you? That's Ralph. He says, well, why didn't you then? And then you're going to highlight, they knew very well why he hadn't, because of the enormity of the knife descending and cutting into living flesh, because of the unbearable blood. So he must have an aversion to blood, okay? And he goes, I was just looking for a place. Next time, he pulls out his knife and he slams it into a tree, and it says, next time there would be no mercy. Okay, so apparently he's a little disturbed by the fact that he couldn't kill the piglet and worried about what these two boys think of him now that he couldn't bring himself to do it, right? Okay, and that's where the chapter ends, okay? So the chapter ends with Jack not being able to do that, can't bring himself. Okay, we wrote scared probably. He finds the piglet, he raises his knife in the air, but he can't bring his arm down. And he probably has never killed something before. So like what you said, in England at a boarding school, he probably isn't going out hunting and killing his own meals, right? Okay, so he probably doesn't want to do it and he has an aversion to blood, all right? Now we have one question that we didn't go over and I just want to go back to it, and it was number 2, okay? And as far as what these boys, your first impression of them, Ralph, you just need to know he's the oldest, he's elected the leader, and he's excited about not having any grown-ups. Okay, Piggy, lots of things, scared, weak, made fun of, asthma, overweight, all that stuff. Jack likes to be in charge, leader, aggressive, outspoken, easily angered, the only boy with a weapon. Probably not a good combination, right? Yeah, okay? So that is the end of chapter 1, okay?
Go back.